Mr. Hector Peckett had a boat. He had built it himself. It stood squarely on the ground in the yard of his little home in the Bronx, very far from the water. Though its seams were uncaulked and it had no keel, to Mr. Peckett it was an argosy in which he sailed the limitless seas of imagination. It was the Golden Hind, the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria, although for reasons of discretion it was named the Sarah Peckett after his wife. But Mrs. Peckett had no use for it. The very next evening, an outraged Mr. Peckett burst into the kitchen.
What have you done to...
After supper, Mr. Peckett went out to spend his last night on the boat. He thought of all the ports he had planned to touch at before snow fell, the strange and secret places he had been saving up for himself. The Black Sea and the Golden Horn. It was now or never for them. He'd have to hurry. He ran his hand over the planks, up and down the rigging. With what love he had put her together, with what steadfastness she had served him. But it had all been make-believe. They'd never been anywhere, really, his boat and he, and now they never would be. The wheels had belonged to a cart once. The wagon tongue stood up past the boat's counter. One could steer by using the tongue like a tiller, and that's just what they do in the morning, steer her down to the corner on her first, last, humiliating voyage. The evening air was cold and moist, and there was a trace of rain in it. Captain Hector Peckett went below and curled up in his bunk. Night came down. The windows of his home glowed like a lighthouse in the darkness. Not far from where the Sarah Peckett rode at anchor, the shifts were changing at the Hollywood restaurant on Fordham Road. 2 waitresses were getting into their street clothes. One was a redhead. The other was Mary Kelly. Mr. Peckett woke with a start to feel his ship tremble. Thrusting his head out of the cabin, he was met full in the face by stinging spray. The Sarah Peckett was heeled far over, her sail bellied out taut. Mr. Peckett leaped for the tiller, and as the chill wind cleared his sleep-fogged mind, he realized that the spray was not salt, it was rain, and the force of the wind was about to capsize the Sarah Peckett into the mud of his own backyard. He grasped the wagon tongue, hoping somehow to ease her. She gave a lurch, her nose swung about in a quarter circle, the wind caught her fair aft, and the Sarah Peckett started slowly across the yard and out toward the street. The same squall that nearly capsized the Sarah Peckett nearly knocked Mary Kelly over as she stepped out of the Hollywood restaurant into the cold wetness of Fordham Road. She stepped into the street as a car approached. It went by her fast, splashing her with dirty water. She jumped back out of the way, stumbled, and sat down hard in a puddle. It was the final indignity. At this moment, Mr. Peckett, bowling along the avenue at a good 4 knots, saw her sitting in the street. Man overboard, he thought, and without a moment's hesitation, smartly swung the bow of the Sarah Peckett up into the wind and brought her alongside Mary. The wind held fair across the Bronx, but it freshened over the Hudson, giving Captain Peckett a little trouble on the George Washington Bridge, where they nearly blew off into the Hudson River. But next morning, when Mary awoke and came on deck, she saw no palm trees. The Sarah Peckett was moored to a gasoline pump in a filling station, and stretching off around them were brown stubble fields. Mr. Peckett, huddled under his coat in the cockpit, heard her moving about and opened a tentative eye. Mr. Peckett soon grew used to the road, which seemed to him like what he imagined the sea to be, endless and gently undulating. For the next couple of days, they held a south-southwesterly course across the Ramapos and over the rolling farm country of Pennsylvania and Maryland. Southward, the haze of autumn deepened over Panama and Virginia. The Sarah Peckett floated on the wind toward Florida and the blue waters of the Gulf. And Mary, her hand on the tiller, dreamed of the warm South and of the day that Mr. Right would come along. So it was that, rounding a curve in the road, she didn't see the young man and his cart until too late. She thrust the tiller hard to starboard. The sail jibed over to port, catching her on the head as it went by. But no power on land or sea could restrain the Sarah Peckett from hurling both wayfarer and conveyance into a ditch. After 2 days of strained formality between them, the wind failed, and the Sarah Peckett lay in the doldrums, becalmed on the outskirts of Fredericksburg in the 38th latitude. When is the moment of falling in love? How deep must the look go before the answering look rises to meet it, swept upward from the heart like a bird or a current? Which is the moment of seeing, when what was known before turns strange, and what was strange is strange no longer, but recalled as from a dream? What sudden glance or silence, what lifted hand or piteous look, fragrance, light upon flesh, unspoken promise, knocks on the door of memory, lights the warm lamp of seeing, opens to hunger again, to the thou art mine of the spirit, the I am thine of the heart? No one can say. There is no rule, there is no history. In town, Mr. Peckett was paying for his groceries when he saw a rack of colored postcards which reminded him of his promise to Mary. He looked them over carefully and selected one that showed a garden of flowers. He carefully addressed it to his wife, and then in a flourishing hand wrote his simple, terse message. The next day, the Sarah Peckett lay still, becalmed outside Fredericksburg, and the captain decided to use the time to make some changes in her that he had long had in mind. And by the time the evening fog rolled up from the river bottom, the job was done. Henry had the watch, and Mary sat beside him to keep him company. For a long time they said nothing, feeling only the dampness of the mist and hearing nothing in the fog-shrouded silence. Then Mary put out her hand, shy and unsure. It lay curled near him like a little leaf. He could take it or not. The next morning dawned bright and fair with a strong breeze from the northwest. The Sarah Peckett weighed anchor, hoisted sail, and set her course south-southeast on Highway 1 out of Fredericksburg, Virginia, with Mary as the masthead lookout, Henry at the tiller, and Captain Peckett in the pulpit on the bow, his harpoon at the ready, scanning the endless waters for the first sign of his quarry. There he lay in the jail cot, the walls of his cell creeping closer, the ceiling slowly pressing down. Toward evening, when he thought he could stand it no longer, they opened the cell door and told him he was free. And he wondered how and why. And there, suddenly standing behind the jailer, was the answer. His wife, Sarah, grim-lipped and stern. Mr. Peckett bolted down the corridor and out of the jailhouse into a rainy autumn night. Down the main street, past the Motion Picture Palace and the 5 and 10 and the post office he ran, until at last he came upon the Sarah Peckett moored at the edge of town. In an instant, he cast loose, hoisted the sail, and with a creak and a rattle, she took the wind and started off down the road. He would sail her forever. They'd never get him. Never. Never again.
Go on. Go on. Faster! Faster!
But far down the highway behind him, the rainy black was sliced.
Special music for today's broadcast was composed and conducted by Jerry Goldsmith.
Wanting many pesos to take away the sting of my father's words. Very nice, baby. Very nice.
Music was composed by Jerry Goldsmith and played by Lorinda Almeida, Jose Barroso, and Nicholas Dan.